Okay, let us pray. Eternal Father and God, we indeed want to give you the thanks and the praise for being who you are and for sustaining us and giving us another day of life. Thank you, Lord, for the day one and for what we will have accomplished. And thank you, Lord, that you have brought us back here safely. And we are expecting exciting things as we learn and as we network together. Bless everything, bless all the facilitators, and bless us as we participate. And may at the end of the day that we'll be better equipped to understand and to promote the use of the internet, and it can help us in our development for this country. Take full control and be the moderator as he moderate as well, in Jesus' name.
All right, you may have your seats. No national anthem today. I've seen at least 2 new faces, and this is good. And just want to let you know that this cybersecurity symposium offers a holistic view of the issues, current threats, myths, pitfalls, and opportunities for safeguarding, defending, and strengthening digital infrastructure against cyber attacks. If you have missed yesterday, indeed, you have missed a great deal. However, you can go on live stream and look for ISOC SVG Cyber Security Symposium, and we have all of the presentations recorded and stored there. This morning, we're going to have our first item on the agenda, a recap of yesterday, and also an overview of today. We're going to invite Mr. Bevel Wooden of ARIN. He's the Caribbean Outreach Liaison for the American Registry for Internet Numbers. Put your hands together as we welcome him to bring an overview and, of course, the recap from yesterday.
Good morning, everyone. How many were not here yesterday? 1. And are we giving access to the recorded stream from yesterday to the on the site? Would that be available? All right. So, since most of you were here yesterday, I'm not going to go into that much detail. For one newcomer, we will be putting all of the sessions online for you to review. We just give you a sense of what you missed, and for those of you who were here, a sense of what we were able to accomplish. So yesterday we called it Cyber Awareness Day, and the idea was to construct a picture of the state of cybersecurity globally and the state of cybersecurity within the Caribbean and here at home. And I think it's safe to say we covered a lot of ground yesterday in terms of understanding what some of the issues were, some of the real threats were. But one of the things that the sessions were really designed to do was to give us a sense of what do we need to be focusing on as the St. Vincent Internet Society chapter in terms of this whole issue of cybersecurity. And I want to use that as the context for setting today's proceedings. Yesterday, someone called Bevel Wooding did a keynote address on the state of cybersecurity and painted this picture of the very real threats, and I think scared some of us into a new kind of appreciation that this is not something that we can be delayed in our response in addressing. But beyond the scare, I think it also opened our eyes to the challenges, the very real challenges we face in the region, particularly as it relates to the human development component, education, public awareness, and the requirement to have a very structured and very organized approach to counteracting the cyber criminal activity, to counteracting the cyber attacks, and to developing a robust and coherent cybersecurity strategy for our organizations and for the country. Inside of that address, the issue of advocacy and the need for voices to be heard at a national level as it relates to bringing awareness to the issues of cybersecurity to the public's attention also came up. Now, there were no media representatives in the audience, but I think it's safe to say that one of the responsibilities for the chapter will be to continue to raise national awareness and translate what often is considered a technical issue into a social conversation. And that's something that one of the presenters, Shinan Osepa, raised in his presentation, this whole requirement for us to ensure that when we are discussing cybersecurity, we have to discuss it in terms and in a context that allows every different demographic, whether you are technical, whether you are policy, whether you're just a parent trying to make sure that your kids are safe online, whether you're a social worker trying to understand some of the issues that are coming before you in the civil society realm, that there has to be a meaningful engagement across the board. And that's where we heard the term multi-stakeholder coming up again and again and again. Multiple groups, multiple interests, multiple backgrounds and perspectives coming together to address this common issue. We looked at the ABCs of cybersecurity and went through some of the terminology that is so pervasive in this area. And if you missed that one, you can Google the terms. There are lots of material online on YouTube and on the ISOC Packet Clearinghouse and our insights dealing with the nature of the threats that we face. And then we had a very interesting panel discussion that looked at the issues that were relevant to St. Vincent and the Grenadines right now. And that's the point I want to branch out into what we have to look at today. Today, we're going to be looking more deeply into the issue of computer incident or computer security incident response teams, CIRTs or CSIRTs. And to understand this whole issue of what is a computer security incident response team and why does it matter, we had Stephen Lee yesterday painting a very, very broad brush picture of CIRTs and their function and their value. Stephen Lee represents the Caribbean Network Operators Group, which is a form of an incident response team for the Caribbean. Not official, all volunteer-based, but a group of persons from around the region who use their skill and their experience to help countries, to help organizations recover from, defend against, and to mitigate cyber security incidents. But there are many types of CIRTs, he pointed out yesterday. And that's what we'll be looking at today. CIRTs are, for some, a government creature where government has to do something and government has to mobilize and get a cabinet minute and get parliamentary approval before it can be formed. But for others, CIRTs are an industry issue where a group of interested, either national or sector or industry-specific stakeholders agree that they're going to share information related to what's happening on the networks and how to respond to it. And so there are no hard rules as it relates to setting up a CIRT, but there are best practices. One of the things that we did not get to yesterday that I wanted to highlight this morning as we go into our discussion is where CIRTs fit into a larger picture of developing more robust and more resilient network infrastructure. And if we look at this last year as an example where some of the territories in the Eastern Caribbean were severely impacted by hurricanes. And inside of that tragedy, we had whole national telecommunications networks going offline. That too is a security incident. All right, so we can look at security incidents in terms of someone hacking a network and gaining unlawful or unauthorized access to the network. But we can also look at security incidents as a network being compromised by disaster or by some unforeseen circumstance. And all of those things cover the issue of protecting critical internet infrastructure and protecting critical networking infrastructure. Everybody with me? Right. So when we think about CIRTs, don't think only in terms of some hooded person in some foreign place trying to break into your network. Think about CIRTs as a defense against any attack, any compromise of any network that you are responsible for or that you have stewardship over. And that's what we have to put into the equation as we get into today's discussion. The other dimension of network security that I wanted to highlight as we go into today's sessions is the issue of network autonomy. And how many of you would have heard the term autonomous systems networks, or ASNs, as something that, just a few, or the others of you are shy? Let me just get those hands again. ASNs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Autonomous system networks are numbers. ASNs are numbers given to autonomous networks. Autonomous networks are networks that have the capacity to exist. Well, actually, let me not take Stephen's presentation. Suffice it to say, one of the things that the region does not have enough of autonomous systems, autonomous networks. And you can get evidence of that by the amount of ASNs that are assigned to the Caribbean, most of which are held by the major telecom providers. Very different from other more developed jurisdictions where once you have a network, you do your best to make sure that you are robust, resilient, and redundant within your control. So one of the issues that happened with the storms this year is that persons who were dependent on the telco providers for IP numbers or dependent on the providers for basic internal network transport found that their networks went down when the carriers' networks went down. That ought never to be so. And that's where the whole issue of, again, if we're coming up with a comprehensive cybersecurity plan, one of the dimensions of that plan has to be increasing the amount of autonomous networks within our jurisdictions. And so one of the areas that we want to look at, and you heard yesterday that there are 2 regional internet registries functioning within the Caribbean. One is the American Registry of Internet Numbers. The other is the Latin American Registry for Internet Numbers, LACNIC. And they both are responsible for assigning ASNs, assigning the numbers that allow you to identify your network on the global internet as its own independent node. But for us to get to that point, network administrators have to tool up as it relates to putting some wonderful boundaries and barriers around their networks. And they also have to tool up as it relates to getting their own IP addresses. Now, I've heard some very interesting stories around people who are told that they don't have to get 2 addresses and 8 addresses and 5 addresses and 10. They can get 500 and 1,000. It's like, well, we don't know if we're ready for that amount of IP addresses for our own. And that kind of mindset that says, well, I will trust that my telecom provider will give me just the right amount of numbers that I need, and I'll manage my network, AKA I'll NAT everything behind those limited addresses according to what they give me. That's not how we build robust, resilient networks in the Caribbean. And that's not how we want to build robust, resilient, secure networks in St. Vincent. And so the issue then becomes, if network resilience is a key part of cybersecurity, because you want to be able to get down to the specific device that was compromised on your network by tracking that trail from the vector of the attack all the way into your network, then you start to realize the limitations of things like NAT. And you start to realize the benefit of things like having every node on your network properly resourced with numbers that you hold and that you own. You start to realize how well it is and how beneficial it is to insulate yourselves from network design changes across in Jamaica because some cable and wireless or digital engineer decided that, well, today, those numbers that I gave that client, I want to take them back and repurpose them for something else, hold these other addresses, which happens to businesses across the region, big and small, that depend on their addresses from the provider, the ISP, and not from the RIR. So in any conversation about certs, cybersecurity, network resilience, network redundancy, you have to have a conversation around network autonomy. And that's where we are today. And because we understand that it is not something that is exactly a headline conversation, nobody calls into the radio to say, I have a problem with my network and my provider didn't give me enough addresses and I want some more. That call is not a call you're going to hear anybody ringing into any radio station to quarrel about. But it's a conversation that needs to happen much more often if we have to move toward stronger networks. So let me ask a question then. How many of you in this room have or plan to have soon your own IP address allocations directly from your regional internet registry. Hands are going up all over the room. You can see. Is there one? Is there one? Come join me at the front and we'll celebrate you. And that's a problem. There isn't one. Because the tradition has been that if you want an IP address, go to your service provider. They'll give you just the right amount that you need, which they will determine. Right, yeah, we'll be broadcasting, so.
The IP address that we have, I've been told it's a block of 6 for the longest while, for like 10 years or so. And we've been trying to get more. Well, I have requested more for the purposes. Well, through my director from our ISP. And one, I said they're saying the cost is very, very high. Because I know we pay quite a lot. I think, they've just not really been kind of giving us at the price that we could accommodate, but we have been requesting more IP addresses.
All right, so 6 is what you have and have had for about a decade.
For the longest while.
And your provider tells you that
And they're not really resolving them in St. Vincent because we have so much issue with the routing of the .gov.vc.
Yeah, and that's exactly my point. And that's the point I hope you're all getting. It is not in the service provider's
so we
interest.
have the problem, basically.
Yeah. It's not in their interest to make sure that you have as many addresses as you need. It's on. I'm actually putting it up. Yeah. Yeah. So confirmation, we have a problem. Anyone else? Would anyone like to have more than 5 or 10 IP addresses on their network to do it as you please, when you please, how you please? You see, this is not an unreasonable request. And when you get into things like IPv6, where you can have as many IP addresses as currently exist on the current V4 internet at your disposal, well, it changes the entire game about how you even conceptualize what is network design. Because then you can literally have an IP address for everything, down to your watch, your toenail, your lunch kit and whatnot. At that stage, which is the minimum V6 allocation, gives an individual or an organization more than the total amount of IP addresses on the current internet. Right? Some people wouldn't even know what to do with all of those IPs, yeah? No more NAT. No more managing from a point of constraint or restriction. It changes what you do with your networks. And when you look at, and this is why I wanted to put it against the backdrop of what took place this year, where we saw the negative implications of the kind of dependencies that most organizations that are attempting to move more of their services online and move more of their services on net. We saw what the danger of the current dependencies are to Caribbean development. There is no reason why the networks that went offline that were downstreaming from the telco providers that went offline, there's no reason why they should have gone offline if they had their own autonomous networks. So when you talk about cybersecurity, there are a set of things that go well before you even get to how to get that hacker out of my network. When you talk about cybersecurity, there are a set of things that get into how do you detect where that attack originated that require you to have end-to-end access to all of the devices connected to your network and to the addresses that point to those devices. And that really is what is at stake here. When we talk about network resilience, we're not talking about something that is nice and optional and maybe one day we could or should have it. We're talking about something that is fundamental to defending, to protecting, and to safeguarding the networks that we're responsible for. And as I said at the start, this is not something the public is going to call in and ask for. So it falls upon the network administrators to say, these are the steps I must take to ensure that my network is as robust and as resilient as it ought to be. Any questions or comments before I go further? Seeing some perplexed looking faces. I'm seeing some, all right. I need a runner because I tethered to this.
Yes, thank you. I just need a bit more clarification on how does it work? You go to your RIR and you get your addresses. What you just assign them to your devices and then everything is okay?
Sivan, you want to take that? I'll take it.
All right. So essentially, the organization, whether that's service provider, so service providers can request their resources from RIRs, and that's what we're used to inside of the region, Flow, Lime, Digicel, and so on. Organization can request as well as a service provider can request as well as an end user organization. So a government department or the government as an institution or a community college can request directly. And what they're basically doing is giving a block of either IP addresses or an autonomous system number to that organization, which you can now have your service provider connect to that IP address range and route it on the internet. So it would require the network administrator upon receiving the addresses to configure their essentially their routers, their edge routers, with those address ranges and set up BGP sessions or routing sessions with the service provider. It does mean, so assume that your service provider would always give you some address 1111 or so on, and you get your address from ARN 2222. You're basically coming off that service provider's one network and saying, hey, I'm 2. And the service provider would have to route you and the service provider between 1 and 2. But that does mean you can switch to another service provider who uses 3333, and you basically just change and say, I'm still 2, and we're now going to route through 3 to get to me. So it gives the organization independence from their service provider network policies and allows a different kind of routing and autonomy to the network. And that's one of the key reasons why organizations might want their own resources and so on. Well, it's a key reason why an organization would want its own resource for that network autonomy, to establish their own routing policies and to be independent from routing decisions that service providers can make, which will affect you as a customer if you're not outside of the network. Right. So in terms of costs, the understanding that number of resources, this is IP addresses, IPv4, IPv6, and autonomous system numbers. Those are global internet resources, which the internet community agrees that nobody really owns it, right? It's a resource that all internet users and stakeholders can use. You don't really own it. So the regional registries are all, and ICANN, these are all non-profit institutions whose job it is to steward and distribute these resources globally. So when you go to ARIN or LACNIC or whoever and you get the resource, they're giving number of resources for you to use freely, right? And so you're not paying for IP numbers. But they also have to operate infrastructure. They have to operate DNS and registry services and so on for those numbers to be administered. It's an organization. And so they all charge service fees to be a member of the institution that gets the organization. So if you get one IP address from ARN, which is actually impossible. I think the least you can get is 256. But if you get one block of IP addresses from ARN, you pay, I think it's approximately $1,000 per year US membership fee. That's also the same membership fee that's paid by Microsoft, which has a few million addresses and so on. So it's a flat fee for anybody who is a member of the organization. The addresses and number of resources that you get it's immaterial. These registries all operate on what's called a needs-based distribution. So if you come to them and say, I need 256 addresses, the response is justify your need, as in you're using network resources which would justify that. And once you can prove it, you get it. And if you say, I need 1 million addresses because you might be Amazon, and they give out addresses like crazy to anybody who has a VM, they will say, prove that you need this, and they prove it and they get it. So it's a needs-based thing, and the fees which are paid are decoupled from the actual resources used. Right?
If anyone has purchased IP numbers from telco providers in the region, you know that that service fee is a fraction of what you pay for far less. And this is the thing I want us to understand, particularly as the internet society, particularly as advocates for change in the internet domain. This ought not to be so. People ought not to be paying exorbitant fees for something as fundamental as IP resources. But it is so because no alternative has been proclaimed. And now we are here, we're saying we will be those who proclaim that there's an alternative. I represent ARIN for the Caribbean, so I can tell you, if you were interested in number resources and you felt that your organization or you as an individual had the need for number resources, we left material at the back there describing how simple it is to get your own. If you said, well, Stephen mentioned the word BGP and I'm not sure what that means, we have groups like CaribNog, ISOC, Packet Clearinghouse that all do training with BGP routing and configuration techniques. Again, for free, you can get the skills, get the knowledge, and get the relationships that you need to build out your own autonomous networks. These are foundation layers for any realistic cybersecurity initiative. Right? We can't talk cybersecurity if we don't have full control over the networks that we're managing. We can't talk cybersecurity if we don't have the basic IP addresses under our control to say what's coming into and out of our networks and how we architect them. And so there's a conversation before the conversation that needs to happen if we're serious about addressing cybersecurity in St. Vincent. And that's why I felt it was so important for us to start on this topic of network resilience and on this topic of network autonomy, because it is not the status quo. I get that. And many of you have been told by your providers that you don't need more than 10 or 5 or 3. Make do with that and be grateful, ye plebs, right? But we're saying this is 2017. And we've seen enough, we know enough, we understand enough to come to the mature position that we could roll out our own networks, thank you very much, with our own IP addresses, thank you very much. And I can tell you what will happen once that momentum begins is the first thing you'll see is a reduction in the price of IP addresses from the service providers as they recognize that more people are going straight to source, right? There is no need for the middleman. And then the next thing we'll start seeing are better network designs across the region. And that's what we're after, right? We should never have to face the kind of outages that we faced this year anywhere in the region. And it starts with the decisions that we make here in this room. So I hope that gives you a good sense of yesterday and a good look into what we need to address today. This is the Cybersecurity Forum, and cybersecurity has as its underlayer the assumption that those people who are going to put their attention to it are people who understand how networks work. Now we're saying we are those people, and we're ready to do the big man things and get our networks in order. All right? So with that, thank you. And I will turn you back over to the MC to direct as he sees fit.
All right, let's put our hands together. We're going to continue with our program directive, which is to have a discussion about the collaborating for security case for CSIRTs. And this will be done by Mr. Stephen Lee from CaribNog. We hope during this presentation that we can understand what is involved in collaborating for the existence of the CSERT and right here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I now hand you over to Mr. Stephen Lee. Put your hands together for him, please.
Thank you, and morning again. For this session, I'm going to ask Mr. Wooden and Mr. Osepa to join me here, and I'm going to just look at a few threat statistics and also lay out the Caribbean context a little bit so that we can talk about the case for CSERTs inside of the region. So let me bring this up. Yeah, let's come here to move back. All right, so while that is coming up, want to look specifically into the context that we have in the Caribbean region, and basically follow on the things that Bevel just outlined in terms of the need for network resilience and autonomous systems, and just looking at the different sectors in the Caribbean where some of our vulnerabilities lie, and how we can start addressing it. The sessions that will follow on a little later today will actually take us through the practical considerations for establishing a CSERT. So that's the session immediately coming up after this, and after lunch, we'll be walking you through the steps. I know that this is something that the ISOC chapter here that's one of the initial projects. It's one of the initiatives inside of the government right now to establish a CSERT. So we'll be dealing with some of those practical considerations. So let me bring this up. So just to start off with, and let me quickly set the context. We covered this yesterday, so we won't get into that. So just some quick statistics. These are all from the latest the Symantec 2017 report on cybersecurity trends. So you can go online, download that report. It's freely available, but it's looking at some of the major threats that we have experienced. And years ago, when giving this presentation, we would have been talking about the high degree of viruses in email. That was like the big thing that everybody was dealing with. We saw numbers move from 70 to 80 to over 90% of email being distributed had malware in it, and email was the primary delivery mechanism. Now that's changed. So the level of email threat is still high, but it's now not the only threat, right? And it's been in many ways surpassed by things like phishing and botnets, which are prevalent. And what we're talking about here is a lot more use of social engineering and going after the user psyche and inviting users to do things which seem legitimate. And we spoke about a little bit about that yesterday, as well as using devices which haven't been sufficiently secured to, for example, IoT devices, Wi-Fi routers, and so on. So we know that these are used a lot inside of our region, and as we talk about the need for resilient networks, Bevel just spoke about network infrastructure. Want to just quickly tap both Bevel and Shernon to give us some quick feedback and view from their perspective on how some of the more common global threats today, whether it is attacks, direct attacks, email, malware, bots, and this last one, ransomware, has been gaining ground inside of the Caribbean. What they're seeing from its the impact back on average end users and organizations, because we want to start to form a clear message in our head about the response systems that we need inside the region. So I want to just start here. I'll ask Bevel and Sharon to just talk to us a little bit about the new threats that we're seeing: ransomware, phishing, as well as the use of botnets, and how those are impacting our communities.
Okay, good morning to all. I think yesterday in my presentation, I did highlight, let's say, all these threats that we are seeing globally. So I'm not going to focus much more on that. But what I can say is that, for example, at Internet Society, we just partnered with a key organization. It's called Online Trust Alliance. So you can Google it online and you can get it. So it's OTA, Online Trust Alliance. So it's an initiative of the Internet Society as well. And we are working with them to, let's say, to promote trust in the internet. And they have a very important document that you can download. So just Google it. It's called 2017 Cyber Incidents and Breach Response Guide. So in that particular document, I think it will help us to understand what Stephen will be talking about later on, I guess, with respect to CSIRT. But there are a few points that I would like to highlight. The first one, we know that data is the new oil. We already did discuss about that yesterday. So everything is data. So we need to protect data. As I showed yesterday in that particular slide, although we will continue to have all these threats out there, it's just like if you're swimming or if you're in the ocean and you have all these sharks around there, you are not going to take all these sharks away. They will continue to be there. But there are ways how we can still be safe or maneuver ourselves, let's say, in that deep ocean without being attacked by these sharks. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. And if something happened, still, how can we be safe? So that is basically the whole focus on what we're trying to do with this cyber incident and breach response guide. There are three best practices or areas that we can focus on when we're trying to protect data. And I think it falls within what we have been discussing. The first one is, and we will be highlighting more in details all these areas. I think that's basically what Stephen will be doing. But I would like to give you the structure that we can use as a point of departure to address all these challenges with respect to cyber incidents. The first one is what we call, we need to implement strong operational and technical guidelines. People need to know what to expect from them. So if we have like a very strong operational guidelines where we are protecting, defending, let's say, our infrastructure, that's the first thing that we should do. But that doesn't mean that threats or incidents cannot happen. They will occur, but once they occur, then we should have an incident response plan available. And that's the way how to protect, let's say, business continuity. Because with all these threats, what we're trying to achieve is to our business need to continue. So we will be focusing on business continuity. And finally, the third area, so all these very key points that I mentioned, we can spend a whole day only talk about each one of them. But I just like to highlight them in order for us to know we can use them as a point of departure. So the first one, we need to implement a very strong operational and technical plan. The second one, incident response plan. So all those who are involved within a given organization, they should know how to deal with incidents when they occur, because the main focus is we need to get up and running as quickly as possible. And the third area is the human factor. You need to understand how people, let's say, function, and especially when they are in a threat, let's say, environment. So these are it's another approach with what we normally are talking about, mostly focusing on technical matters. But if we use these three, let's say, areas or steps, then I believe we can start heading in the right direction. So this would be another. I didn't really go, let's say, on the technical matters, because when it comes to cyber incidents and breach response, if we can have all these, let's say, embedded in these three areas that I already did mention, then I think we are on our way. And remember, CSIRTs, for example, we should see them as fire brigade. That's what they say, right? So, fire brigade. So whenever you go to a country and you see only, let's say, fire brigades running in that country, there's something wrong, right? Because that's not the way it's supposed to be. Of course, you should have fire brigade in place, but just imagine everywhere you see fire brigade. So there's something fundamentally wrong going on in that particular country. And this is the same thing with the CSIRT. It's necessary because in addition to focus on incidents, it has a very key role when it comes to coordination of crime that goes beyond, let's say, borders. Because as you may know, the internet is not attached to a given jurisdiction. So a good example would be, for example, let me see, if you go to El Salvador, there's one, let's say, South American or Central American country. And if there is a crime in El Salvador, when you go to the neighbor, for example, Honduras, they may have different, let's say, law in that particular country. So if these two countries don't collaborate, if they don't exchange data, if they don't work together, someone can just cross the border and go away with that crime. And that's the same thing with CSIRTs as well. That is why CSIRTs are not only important for us to focus on incidents that happen in a given country, but it is also very important for us to coordinate with other countries all around the globe in order for us to address or solve crime, cyber crimes that are taking place in our country. We know that especially other countries, they are using, not other countries, it's not countries, individuals living in other countries. Most of them, they're using the Caribbean as their playing ground because most of the times they know that our networks are wide open. So they come here, they gain all the, let's say, necessary expertise, and from here they go do their stuff in other countries. So we need to have ways how to work with other countries. So this will be also a very important task of a CSIRT to coordinate with other, let's say, CSIRTs in other countries. For example, we have here a chapter, an International Society chapter here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. If you would like to know something and I'm looking now in the direction of Roxanne, for example. If you would like to know something that is happening in Barbados, I'm sure the right person that you're going to contact, that's Rodney Taylor, because he's the chair of the chapter in Barbados. So this is the same thing with CSIRTs as well. That is why we need to have them, but we should not be focusing only on CSIRT. Again, it's a holistic approach whereby it is necessary, but we need also to look on other areas, how we can defend, let's say, or protect our networks, and focusing on operational and technical matters. So I think with that is a very long introduction, and based on how the discussions develop, I'll be willing to give some more insights on that.
Roxanne John here. My question to Shonan, just for clarification. Now, you are saying we ought to focus on operational and technical as well, but doesn't this sort address that? Or if not, then what will you call the holistic system?
When I'm talking about focusing on a holistic system, CSIRT, let's say, forms a part of the wider discussions going on in a country. So let's take it, for example, to a country level. CSIRT stands for Computer Security and Incidents Response Teams. So basically, these are the teams that will come in action, just like the fire brigade. You would not see a fire brigade just running around without any specific tasks to do. But these guys, that doesn't mean that these guys are not doing anything. If you're acquainted with what they're doing, they are training, most of them are very muscular, you know. They are doing other stuff because they are preparing for when the incident happens, that they can act quickly and solve that problem. And this is the focus, because the focus is business continuity. So if you don't have a CSIRT that is, let's say, well trained, then when something happens, they don't know what to do. And these are the three areas that I did mention. So the operational part, the incident response plan, and also the human factor. The human factor would be how these people deal with under this environment of stress. One topic, for example, would be how to deal with press. We don't focus much on that, but when something happens, you should have someone there in your CSIRT. How do you call it? A spokesperson, the one that should be talking to media and saying, okay, this is happening, and explain and give some good reasons why this is happening and how we are going to solve the problem that we are experiencing right on that particular moment. I know, and I've noticed that, for example, in discussions yesterday, that especially in the Caribbean, we don't want to talk much when something happens. It's more like ostrich, and I'm talking about the wider Caribbean. I'm not focusing on one particular country. I think Bevel did mention that yesterday as well. It's we have our problems, but we don't want to share that. But at least if you look at the global community, this is one of the things that CSIRTs are doing. They are sharing with the media what is going on. The fact that they are sharing with the media doesn't mean that they are promoting what is going on. It's a fact. People need to know what is going on. So that is why they are talking about it. So Roxanne, coming back to your question, the CSIRT has, let's say, how do you call it? They need to act before, let's say, incidents happens. They have a lot of tasks to do while things are calm, let me put it like that. But they have also a function to do when an incident occurs. And based on those two extremes, it's up to the CSIRT to decide how they're going to deal with that. But there are best practices how they can do with that. A good CSIRT would be one that basically you don't even know that they exist, because there is no task for them, you know. But that doesn't mean that they are not working. While they are not working on, let's say, incidents, they are working on other matters with law enforcement. They are working on education, education, raising awareness with respect to cybersecurity. And by doing that, we will reach a stage where we have a very trusted environment where basically the focus of only of the objective of only focusing on incident response is not necessary, because there's nothing wrong going on in the country. So I hope that I did answer your question, and if not, I'll be happy to continue elaborating that.
Yep.
I just want to actually, I thought the analogy of the fire station, the fire service officers and the fire response to be very relevant to a discussion on CERT, because it allows us to see that the CERT does not exist in a vacuum, just like a fire unit will not exist in a vacuum. And if you think about what makes the fire services effective, it starts to point to the responsibility of managers and owners of networks, as just as it would be for the owners and operators of buildings and facilities. A fireman or a fire response team can't effectively go into a building that was engulfed in flames without plans, if they did not have access to the plans for the building. And we have seen incidents on Caribbean networks where you're trying to help someone on their network and they don't have a documented network plan. They can't tell you where they gave out or where they deployed assets on the network. And it gets to something Shannon just mentioned in terms of the responsibility of the CERT between incidents to be an advocate for proper practices, proper network administration practices, proper network design practices, and proper network management practices as part of their responsibility. Because even though it's an incident response team, its objective really is to ensure that there are as few incidents as possible. Just like the fire department wants to ensure that people are doing things that do not result in buildings going up in flames or homes going up in flames. So if we look at some of the responsibilities of a fire department and kind of map them to the CERT, you will see, Roxanne, that question that you asked, where does it fit and what does it do? The incident response is its key function to be able to respond to computer security incidents. But to have that response capacity, it has to train. And so persons who are part of a CERT have to be engaged in continuous training around network design, around intrusion detection, around network administration best practices to be able to decode and to discern where attacks are coming from and how to trace them to source. Now that gets me back to what I was saying earlier on network autonomy. If you can't, beyond your NAT, determine which assets may have been compromised, then a CERT can't actually help you identify what's the root of the problem. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was getting at earlier this morning when I was saying the start point is to ensure that we have network autonomy, because network autonomy empowers your CERT. Network autonomy allows you to say to that incident response team, here's the sector or zone of my network where I think this compromise was originated, or where I think they're going after, and to be able to trace that to real addresses and to trace it to a real network map that is not stored in somebody's head because they have a great photographic memory, but it's stored on a documented plan because you intend to have management that is modern and management that is shareable. So somebody then saying, okay, let's sit down and see if we can find the source of this attack, can actually look at the network map, see where assets are deployed, see which nodes have been updated and which haven't been recently, based on documentation. And that's a big part of what allows CERTs to be effective and functional. A couple months ago, I think it was last March this year, the National Institute for Standards and Technologies released a framework for improving critical internet infrastructure. So it was a cybersecurity framework looking at the issue of critical internet infrastructure, and they identified 5 areas which I think will be relevant for us. This is all available online, and these are documents that are used in the CERT community as references that can get back into how we go about the business of administering our networks. And they said the issues, the blocks of this framework were identify what processes and assets need protection. So actually have a list of the things that you want to protect. They said what safeguards are available under a protect block. So if once you identify, the next thing would be having identified, let's protect these assets. And let's define that protection in terms of specific safeguards. Detect what techniques can we use to identify incidents as something that all on the team are conscious of. These are the techniques that we're going to be deploying. Therefore, this is where we need to direct training and where we need to direct our outreach and public awareness type activities. And then the last two would be response and recover. What techniques can contain the impacts of incidents and what techniques can restore capabilities? So identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And these 5 blocks then allowed the CERT teams to determine where attention was going to go. And I'm suggesting that you might have these same 5 or a version of that 5 that allow you to determine if we're going after a local CERT, these are the areas that we want to address. So one group can look at this issue of network autonomy and making sure that anyone who wants to avail themselves of the services of the CERT comply with standards that have been established by the CERT as necessary to effectively aid in incident response. Protection, ensure that training takes place so that network administrators network first responders are aware of specific techniques and aware of specific attack techniques as well that can be mitigated against by certain specific steps and responses. So what it does, it allows the CERT to focus on very specific development goals and very specific development areas and use that definition to build the structure of the CERT, to determine what are the linkages between the CERT and other groups, just like your fire department has to work with the police and has to work with the Attorney General and others, depending on what was the nature of the fire. So too the CERT has to work with other groups who are not part of the CERT. But when you get down into an attack coming outside of this country and you need to know what was the actual source, which country, and sometimes these incidents hop countries. The CERT needs to have connections and trust bridges that span jurisdictions. So Roxanne could call Rodney, but then Rodney might call Washington, and Washington might call Kiev, and Kiev might call London, and London might call Sydney, just to trace a St. Vincent attack. And that actually happened. And so the CERT has to prove itself in that international community as being appropriately structured, appropriately resourced, and appropriately trained to work inside of that trust community. Because that's how these things work at the international level. You have the assurance that when you pick up that phone and call someone in DC, and it's going to be someone like you, don't think distant and aloof. It's another network administrator willing to provide support, but he has to know that the person he's talking to locally is equally as professional and equally as adept at the task of incident response. So there are different frameworks, Roxanne, but there are also opportunities for us to structure the local CERT in a way that gives that assurance that we have both the training, the resource, and the relationships that are needed to establish that trust network.
One other detail that we have seen within the CERT community, it's also a community of trust. So you would find that people, it's like, I would not say like a closed group thing, but you need to be a member of that particular group. For example, let me just give an example. If someone from Namibia, for example, just send an email to Bevel Wooding, I'm sure we will answer that email, but maybe it will take a few days before he answers, right? But if he just got an email from St. Vincent and he was, for example, he gets an email tomorrow from someone who was in this room, I'm sure he will answer immediately because he has a what do you call it? A trust relationship with that particular person. And this is the same thing with the CSIRT community. If you are not part of that community, that is why it's very important, once you have your CSIRT up and running, to attend all these CSIRT meetings, because you will notice it's a closed group thing. And most of the, not only discussions, but most achievements are not even being done or achieved, let's say, in meetings. It's more after meetings where people get more in the social environment. And here you see all these relationships are built. So the point I would like to make, it's a community of trust. You need to be, let me call it, accepted within that community. And once that's the case, you can get all the assistance that is needed.
We have another question.
Speaking about the certs, right? Then wouldn't it be necessary that the organization or the government establish a cybersecurity management system? Yeah. Yeah, maybe the terminology is not correctly translated to the English, but it's not necessarily an information system. It's a policy approach of what needs to be done in terms of what organization should have in place of manage their cybersecurity infrastructure, the way how they're going to go about the vulnerability assessment, the risk assessment, the way how they respond to certain things, the methodology they use, whether it is Cobalt 5, whether it is Margarita, whether it is ISO 27700, I think it is, and how they go about responding and actually preventing these issues.
Well, just a quick response on that. So, and that goes back to exactly what Shannon was saying a little earlier in response to Roxanne, and what we had looked at yesterday. The CSIRT itself is one element of what has to be a wider framework or strategy. So the things that you spoke about, exactly, yes, for it to be effective, you do have to have that government level. You have to be, we have to engage law enforcement. We have to engage service providers, different actors at different levels, but everybody has to be on the same playbook. And there are a few different frameworks out there. The International Telecommunications Union, ITU, has one structure. CTU has one structure too. Shannon just spoke about ISOC's collaboration to have a structure. The OAS has another, and so on. So it's select one, and then we build out in that.
Misinterpretation. From what I would have gathered from some of the courses I'm doing currently, that the cybersecurity management system is something that implemented in organizational base. It could be national, it could be in the organization, not necessarily the police force can also have their own cybersecurity management system, but it is, as I said before, it's not IT-based system, but it's a policy how you handle your cybersecurity infrastructure.
All right.
Let me take a swing, because I think that I think I get where you're going with it. The key thing to remember with cybersecurity generally is that it does not have to be government initiated. And there are two issues to bear in mind as far as that is concerned. One is the issue of standard setting. Like, is there a framework that managers or administrators of networks look to as the de facto for how they should go about the business of network administration? And as Stephen said, there are many, and it's easy to convert the many into something that is declared as a national standard. And again, this is where the role of the chapter becomes interestingly important, because the chapter can give blessing to a national cybersecurity framework. And that would be sufficient to give guidance to persons seeking to implement best practices for secure network administration. But there's a second component, which is where I think you were implying a role for government, and that is enforcement of the standard. So you can have a standard like the one that I read from, or the one that Shannon referred to, or that Stephen referred to. But then who forces, or should someone enforce compliance? And going back to Shannon's fire department analogy, there are fire codes, right? There are a set of guidelines that are established about the kinds of materials that go into buildings and about the kinds of practices that are considered legal or illegal as it relates to handling flammable material. And then there is an agency or several agencies responsible for enforcement, from inspectors to out and out security services. Should such a thing apply nationally? And is such a thing necessary to get the cybersecurity initiative going in St. Vincent? And that becomes a question that the community could and should answer. So the standard is one thing, right? We should be telling our network administrators, here are our considered best practices. And from that place of definition, we can then move towards saying at some point, this is what we want to do to ensure that there is enforcement. But you can't get to the enforcement before you get to the standard definition, right? There's no transgression if there is no law. And so our first act will be to work out what is the appropriate, or what are the appropriate set of standards for network administration or secure network administration in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And that can be based on a review of existing documents with a consideration of the realities on the ground, with an objective of raising the standard and lifting the tide for everyone responsible for network administration. And that can be your first task for the suit. Because I repeat again, you cannot have effective incident responsiveness if you don't have standards, if you don't have autonomous networks, and if you don't have effectively trained personnel. So it's a question of getting the priority and the sequence correct before we can get into the full benefits of suits.
Maybe just one short comment. It's also very important to, I keep saying this, to coordinate. Because if you just take a look, the best example that we have is the internet itself. There is no global organization or only one particular organization that is managing or governing, let's say, the internet that we're using nowadays. But that doesn't mean that this is chaos, basically what we are seeing with the internet. That's not the case, because there is coordination. Normally you have a group of 6, let's say, group of organizations, and all of them are working together in order for us to have the internet that we have nowadays. I'm just mentioning this because while you may be focusing on one particular area, it's very important for you to coordinate and to sync, let's say, with other entities. That's in order for us to avoid like a kind of a wild west. You know, it's very important to synchronize and to coordinate with other entities. And by doing that, I think at the end we will reach where we should reach, but still coordinate with others where we would like to go. And the highest level, because you may have different layers, even that we're talking about in a technical environment, you may have different layers, but on the highest layer, you may find what we call a national, I think Bevel did mention that, a national strategy for a given country. And CSIRT may fall, let's say, somewhere in that national cybersecurity plan for a given country.
So I want to kind of get some more feedback and conversation going around the issue of what we just spoke about, a wider framework or wider environment that a CSIRT falls into. And I know the chapter here is looking at it, but I'd be interested in getting feedback from the room as to what is the general state of the initiative inside of St. Vincent towards CSIRTs or a wider cybersecurity plan or framework on a national level. Is there anybody here who could speak to that? Awesome.
Yes, I am aware that the ministry responsible for technology has it on their plan as an indicator to establish a CSIRT. They have been in discussion with some entities in terms of how we go about doing it. And so I know we have some representatives from government here who actually will be part of that discussion. I know they have that on the books.
Okay, all right, thanks, Roxanne. So, but that's talking about CSIRT, that operation specifically.
Yeah.
Aware of anything that docks into like cybercrime strategy, wider coordination in which is like Sernan just said, that CSIRT is just like one.
Well, now that we're here, I become even more aware that we need to think bigger than that. We need to think about the cybersecurity framework. That's why I asked the question, because I realized that we are drilling down rather than looking at the wider scope. So I think even the government themselves may not have thought about that they need to go to a wider framework.
Okay.
And now that you have the knowledge, I think we'll do that.
I see. Some more feedback.
Okay. At the moment, what we have at ITSD, we have certification for the ISO is at 2700, the information system management for our office. And what we want to do is roll it out to the rest of the government, because we have it as a policy that we're working under. And we've had, I think now for 3 years, Andre? It's 2 years. Yeah, so we've been certified now for the 2nd year, just this last November. And this is something that now that we have the information standards and we understand, all the policies that is involved, each step of the way gives you a policy that covers the password, the clear screen, all the different operations of our department. This is something that can be rolled out to all the government so that can control. I myself is head of the risk management team, which now you can evaluate risk for, now we evaluate risk for our department, but that standard now could be used to evaluate the risk of the entire government network. So we can have a better understanding of the, risk, of course, and the budgeting needs, what we need to buy, what's our risk level, what we need to evaluate. And all of this, it's organizing your department for something like a CERT, because we have our incidents documented and a response process. So while we have that organized in the department, and if we can have that throughout the government, if I'm thinking, my understanding of the CSIRT is, if at least the IT community and the business has that sort of organization and some structure documentation, they can respond to their incident in-house according to the nature of the incident. And where we get to a national level, this is the case. I know that there's a incident response for products. I remember some years ago, they had from Japanese cars, they imported some, what do you call it, radiation something. When they had this explosion in Japan, they were sending the cars to the Caribbean, and they had an incident in Jamaica, and we have a regional response for that. I actually don't remember what it's called, but because the car came in Jamaica, we were notified about the car, so we were able to check, and the other Caribbean country now were able to check, because we had that notification from a regional response. So basically at the national level where you have a response, You know, Braves might have an attack, and if they tell everybody, everybody else would know that this is something that is coming in. And then somebody may have their attack and they might resolve it, and they can give the information that this is something that we've done to alleviate that. So that's really the basic of my understanding of the CSOT. But it's organizing the IT, like they're saying, is like the fire department, is organizing the information technology content around that sort of structure.
Exactly. So I'm glad we're actually having this discussion and taking it there, because as Roxanne said, to focus exclusively on the CSIRT, we're drilling down into one specific aspect. I want to just be aware that we want to fit it inside of a bigger conversation. And if that conversation isn't going on in St. Vincent right now at the right level, to trigger it, right? Raise a flag so that other actors can get involved. Even the initiative moving outside of the Ministry of Finance into the wider government, that's a significant step, and also want to go beyond the government into making sure that the rest of civil society and organizations and structures are actually coordinated into something that fits within a bigger framework.
Just one comment. Maybe you guys don't realize, but here in St. Vincent, and especially with this chapter, you have how do you call it? A big advantage, because I was looking at the members of this chapter. It's very diverse, and not only it's very diverse, you have key persons, let's say, that can help you achieve great things. For example, I was looking at Dr. Gerald Thompson, former minister, advisor to the government special projects. So I think it's much more easier for you guys to achieve some concrete things than maybe some other chapters that don't have, let's say, those high level profile persons as members of the chapter. So I don't think this should be a problem to get, let's say, to focus on a wider plan for with respect to cybersecurity, in which, let's say, a CSIRT will be part of that that plan, basically.
Anybody else can feedback on that specific point? Anybody here working on any cybersecurity initiatives at some level in your organization or team? And if you can tell us a little bit about how that is being coordinated.
Well, the thing is, we're currently not focusing on the cybersecurity plan, but I have it in mind for when I complete my master's, because I'm going to do my thesis at my workplace, which is the airport. I'm going to come up with a cybersecurity management system to implement at the airport, because it is something that you can select to do. And since I'm working there, is one of the newest institutions in the country, I want to make sure that it's relevantly secured and protected. Mm-hmm. So that's what me personally, I'm going to be working on. And after I finish my master's, when I start to do some of the certifications in the cybersecurity world, on the ISAC and certified ethical hacking and along that line.
All right, cool. Very good. So that will result in organization level, enterprise level security framework or plan. So that's good. Anyone else working inside of that space? Heard from the ministry? No, nobody else. Okay. Wanted to put up an example of what a national framework would look like.
Yeah, I wanted to share, just based on Roxanne, what you said, which is a very valid point. There is no CERT that exists outside of a larger, more comprehensive national approach to cybersecurity. And that approach typically involves the development of a national cybersecurity strategy. I think we hammered home the point yesterday that this is everyone's business, not just the technical community. The actors who are impacted by security incidents come from every area and every facet of of industry, of government, and of society. And so one of the things that we've been looking at, and I say we here, meaning the group of us, including Albert Daniels, who was here yesterday, that are working across the region, was a more comprehensive way for the Caribbean to look at this issue of development of that national cybersecurity plan. Shernan Osepa, Stephen Lee, myself, and others worked with the Belize government to develop to help them develop their national cybersecurity policy. And the start point for that, you'll be very interested in knowing, was the first Belize National Cybersecurity Symposium, a fairly large event, but we felt it was an event that gave us a model that could be applied in other areas of the region. And the format for this meeting, the topics that were shared in this meeting came from some of the structures that we discovered and learned in putting together this event for Belize. And I want to share it with you because I think it gives you a template, not necessarily the exact steps, but a template that you can use to consider how do you expand this conversation and how do you create a wider understanding of what are some of the elements that need to go into a multi-sectoral cyber security strategy. And this is what we came up with as our objectives. And you'll see that they're really not much different from what we've been discussing over the past 2 days here. First, we wanted the national community to gain an understanding and insight into the fundamentals of cybersecurity. What is it? Why does it matter? In English terms, right? Not in techie terms. And we created a set of content to address that. We wanted the national community to learn strategies for protecting corporate networks. And I'll tell you how it panned itself out into the structure. We dealt with updates from government. One of the things that we recognize, and this applies across the region, is that while activities are taking place, they're some of the best kept national secrets. So you have divisions and areas of government that are actually engaged in cybersecurity right now, but many members of the public who ought to know are unaware. And in whose act these initiatives are taking place, it remains invisible and transparent to them. So one of the things we used the forum to do was to have persons already involved in cybersecurity in any way present to the national community. This is what we're doing. This is how long we've been doing it. This is why we're doing it. And this is how it benefits you. And so we made sure that there was an objective to have updates from both the government and from the regulator on plans that intersect with cybersecurity. Then we created a forum to ensure that people could share network ideas and experiences and knowledge with their peers and their counterparts who they may not have ordinarily intersected with. And then, of course, at the end of every day and at the end of every session of that symposium, people sit in groups and come up with specific plans that would form part of the national cybersecurity agenda. And this is what the week looked like. It was a 1-week symposium. The first day was much like what we have done here over day 1 and day 2. It was a cyber awareness day. And we had persons from every single sector of Belize society present. Over 350 persons, over 500 persons came together in one venue to look at cybersecurity from a national perspective. And don't just say wow about the numbers. What made it really special and unique was the diversity. On the head table for that morning was the Chief Justice, the Attorney General, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Police Commissioner, a couple members from the United States Embassy, who they have a major launch point for cybersecurity into Central America, all present on one table, all to say one thing, together, we serious about cybersecurity. Now, understand what that did to the person sitting down in the room who would have said, but nothing happening in this country with cybersecurity. These people wasting time, sounds familiar? Nobody really understands how important this issue is. When those persons stood up and said, this is important, and we agree, even though we have battles in other areas, we agree to work together because this is in our common interest, it transformed the entire context for the week. And so from that first day, the National Cyber Awareness Day, we went into a set of fora that were specific to people's interests. So the financial services sector met across by the central bank, and they looked at the issues of disclosure. They looked at the issues of the specific threats facing the financial services sector. They spoke in industry terms, but against the backdrop of this national conversation. The public sector met and spoke about threats to government networks. They spoke about the issues regarding training of public sector officers. They looked at some of the very real resource constraints and the vulnerabilities that the people component bring to government networks. And they had that conversation at the end of every forum, as I said. At the end of every forum, they all sat down and said, here are the highlights. These are our next steps. And every group, from the public to the business forum to the law enforcement group, we had guys marching in full regalia, soldiers, police officers, Coast Guard, immigration, customs, sitting down as one group to look at how cybersecurity affects national security. And then sitting down as one group to work out here the steps that we must take. And something very interesting happened as we proceeded through the week. The sense of a coordinated strategy emerged. And with every end of day discussion around what comes next, Belize decided something fairly unique. They didn't want at the end to have a single national cert. They felt that because of the level of fracture and fragmentation and secrecy and some of the other real issues that were being faced across these sectors, that it would be best to start with industry certs. Right? Now, again, templates. I'm not saying you have to start with industry certs. I'm saying that they sat and worked out in very real, very candid terms. This is the nature of our landscape. The network community, that's your ISPs and the private network operators, said, we don't really trust the government to look into our networks when we're under attack, so we would talk amongst ourselves. If something is of sufficient scale and we know that government has its own cert, we will have a cross-cert conversation. And that worked for them. That worked for them. By the time we got to day 5, which was the task force was essentially drawn from representatives from each forum. So 2 members of the judiciary, 4 members of the protective services, 3 members from the business community, 5 members from the network operators group, I think it was 7 members or so from government. And they sat down and they worked out, based on how this week went, this is what we want to see in a Belize National Cybersecurity Strategy document. And then they gave themselves, I think it's about 12 months. So by April of 2018, we'll be presenting a draft of their national cybersecurity framework based on that national consultation. Since this big meeting, they've had several smaller meetings with each of the groups to work through how and what needs to be done in the specific areas. So, for example, we'll be working with the judiciary to ensure that judges and magistrates are trained in cyber lingo, trained in an understanding of some of the attacks that are taking place and why time-sensitive judicial decisions are necessary, the things that nobody was talking to them about before. And again, the role of an ISOC chapter that is willing to partner with a national group to translate techno speak into legal speak and translate technical speak into social speak becomes practically important and fundamental to increasing the national dialogue. You all with me? So it wasn't an event, it was the start point for an initiative to bring about national cybersecurity awareness. One of the big things that came out of the public forum, I sat over that forum, was this whole issue of public awareness, getting into the schools, working in the communities and in the villages, dealing with the trainers and educators of young persons, engaging at-risk youth and giving them training and skills that they can go out and become ambassadors for best cyber safety practices. That group decided to do a national cyber awareness campaign. That group engaged the media. That group is working with entertainers and musicians to come up with a local cyber safety campaign. I say local because you can get all kinds of stuff on the YouTube talking about the importance of cybersecurity for national interest that don't really resonate with Caribbean people. So what we wanted was something that said, yeah, man, you want to be safe? Do this in a local parlance, local dialogue, local dialect, local accent. because when it gets to reaching the persons that we felt were most vulnerable, we felt that that had to come from local voices. So it was a really comprehensive approach to national cybersecurity development and strategy building. And I'm presenting it to you as a model. The same group that came to support the local chapter with this event is the same group behind this. And you heard Shannon say it, you heard me say it, you heard Stephen say it, you heard Albert say it. Our commitment is to the region. And we understand that there are things that are happening that ought not to be happening, and that there are those who have the ability to make a difference if they're put on the right track and given the right resource. And so part of our responsibility is to ensure that as far as possible, that resource is made available to all. So I'm presenting you this resource as a template, how you use it, what you do with it, whether you throw it all away or say we want this piece or that piece of it. You have now the full access to the material that went into making this event, and you can tailor it as you see fit to creating a similar national discussion around cyber security and cyber safety. All right? My offer to you.
All right, thank you, Bevel. Remind us what Bevel said yesterday when Roxanne mentioned the issue of a symposium, and are looking at CSERTs that we don't want this to just be a single event that's focused on this one topic, because then we actually won't get any lasting effect and impact out of it. It won't actually transform anything. So what we saw happening in Belize is actually still happening. All the stakeholders are still engaged. They are actually working it out and pushing this out across the different industries, into schools, into different sectors, and so on, because what they did was agree upon a long-term multi-stakeholder initiative, which will just keep going. And that is what we want to move to in terms of actually protecting ourselves nationally and regionally. All right, so I believe we're at the end of the session. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks, Shernon and Bevel, for your input into this session. And I'll turn over to our moderator, Kerry.
Thanks, man. Okay, let's put our hands together once again for them. I know we were asking questions as we went along, but do we have any closing questions on this particular session? Any additional information that you would like to get? If not, let's move on. I would like to do a quick promotion on behalf of ISOC SVG chapter. Today, we're going to be offering a special. Now, it's not difficult to sign up to be a member of ISOC. And the special is this. If you are not a member as yet, and you sign up today, that is before we leave, you're going to be entitled to a free t-shirt. Now, somebody should be clapping for that. You will notice our members, they're currently wearing t-shirts that sport who we are and what we are about. So if you're not a member, you can sign up today and you can get a free t-shirt. Now, this only applies to the first 10 persons. So it's not an unlimited something, all right? So if you would like to partake in, a very, let me bundle this t-shirt so you could see, very nice t-shirt, good quality. Sign up. And it's okay to WhatsApp your friend, say, hey, they give a free t-shirt out by French's house, but it's not something to be inactive about. We want you to be passionate about making a change in this particular area. Our agenda points out that our next activity is break. We shall commence our break now. and we shall return promptly at 10 minutes to 11. All right, at 10 minutes to 11, we shall return. Sorry, let's go to 11. I just realized that I lost 10 minutes. So we'll go straight to 11. There's water at the back, those who would like to get. And remember, the break, we usually have snacks, and you can get those downstairs, all right? Downstairs in the lunchroom. Thank you very much. See you at 11.